Obviously, this panel is on bisexual plus identities and visibilities, and we have the privilege today to be joined by Marinella, Marisa, and Ada. So I'm going to introduce each speaker, and at the end of all three, or each presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. So our first speaker today is Marinella Matejčić, who is an ND queer feminist activist and advocate. Her scope of interest is quite wide and heavily dependent on her hyperfocus at a particular moment. And she will be presenting today her work, Bicurious, No Bisexual. So I will pass it over to you, Marinella.
Hello, hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, you're good.
Great, let me try to share my presentation. Hopefully everything goes well. Just a second. There. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me just figure out how to, yeah, slideshow. Okay. So, just a moment. So, thank you for the introduction. The name of the research is Bicurious, No Bisexual. Although in Croatian language, Bikuriožna, it's not actually translatable because it's not the same as Bicurious, but because Bikuriožna brings a different set of meaning in the whole setting. So we kind of decided to name it like that. And it makes much more sense in Croatian. This research is actually a super small one. I was listening to the keynote speaker and I was in awe, like what are all of the different things that people are doing across the world and how the movement is growing and changing and shifting in accordance with the society as a whole. But when it comes to my country, Croatia, Croatia is a super small country based in Eastern Europe or the Balkans, depending on the context. There is only 4 million of us, and the queer history has not been recorded. And in that sense, the work that I've been doing on bisexuality is like a standalone work. Unfortunately, at this point, we do not have a lot of research or data on the subject. So in relation with that one, I've opened the analysis of the research with this quote from Paula C. Rust as, we do not have the narrative, we do not form the discourse at this moment. There is not a community that functions as a whole. There are more like small communities, mostly online, scattered throughout the space. And within the larger LGBTIQ plus movement, the subgroup is invisible, but the findings of the research do correspond with the findings of similar researchers in other places. So the purpose was to explore the main narrative surrounding bisexuality through the voices of bisexual individuals. Key question was, how do bisexual individuals experience their identity, and what are the prevalent discriminatory concepts they face? And as I said previously, bisexuality is under-researched in Croatian academic space, but also in terms of activist work or advocacy work. Not much has been done. Of course, there are people who come out and push for changes, but everything kind of just...
Okay.
Sorry?
Sorry.
Yeah, so people come and start doing something, but it's not, for some reason, it's not feasible. It does not stay. It's more like small lights in the night than something that is constantly on the table. So what I have done, I had 9 semi-structured interviews via Zoom through September and October 2022. The booklet was published in December 2024, unfortunately only in Croatian so far. I spoke to 5 cis women, 2 non-binary people, and 2 cis men. During the keynote, there was a lot of discussion on the whiteness of research, but in my country, currently it's quite hard to do a reach out to other groups, and we are quite homogeneous. So there is not much racial differences in Croatia, so to say. There are some, but the whole movement, better to say social movements besides the queer movement, are having difficulties with reaching out, exploring, giving space to people. It's a whole different discussion. So I mostly talked about them on biphobia, fetishization, and invisibility. So, okay. Key concepts are bisexuality in society, which is often erased or invalidated due to binary views, what we are all aware of. Fetishization, biphobia, and invisibility. We had some great discussions on discrimination both inside and outside of the LGBTIQ community, where when we talk about within the queer community, in that sense, people said how they feel either invisible or they're being almost mocked, while in heterosexual community, there is erasure, fetishization, commodification, like the palette of all of the discriminatory practices that are being implemented is quite wider. And I don't know, why is it like that? I mean, this research, as most of researchers and social sciences, opened a bunch of questions and did not answer any in particular, but I think that's just something that we all know, cherish, and continue working on. When it comes to defining bisexuality, we have also had a lot of discussions on pansexuality, but somehow Robin Och's definition resonated with most. And I think that is it's a good starting point if we see it as a starting point, because even though there is a lack of organized movement or any force that would put the notion of understanding bisexuality on any kind of different stream, sometimes and somehow gets lost in our own discussions on the differences between pansexuality, bisexuality, and every other form of non-monosexuality. Okay, now we are getting to the social perceptions of bisexuality. So common misconceptions were, of course, a phase or experimentation. Participants have faced assumptions about their sexuality based on current partners and difficulty fitting into binaries of heterosexualities and homosexuality. What was super interesting is that one of the non-binary participants stated how they have had experience with women during which those women would put too much pressure on them and expectations on how would they act if they were in a relationship with a man, what is actually something that drives them. And there was a lot of discussion about unicorn hunting as well, which is not so prevalent in my little group of respondents. And yeah, that's it about I see that like time is just running out and I'm on the beginning. Just a second. Yeah. So when it comes to fetishization, Marta shared that almost every male partner assumed her bisexuality meant openness to threesomes. Yakov said that some women fetishized my bisexuality, reducing me to certain sexual practices. And this type of commodification and objectification of bisexuality is quite noticeable in pornography, where the sexuality per se is just used to put kind of a spotlight of on someone else's ideas of on what, how, and what should someone do while in that situation. On invisibility, and biphobia, Boyan said that bisexuality is erased, visible only when sexualized in a way benefiting heterosexual norms. Biphobia in LGBTIQ spaces, bisexuality is dismissed or misunderstood. And Vesna said that bisexual are often seen as not queer enough or experimenting. And those sentences are most probably shared in research like this across the globe and in every possible way, because there are not any large differences between what I've read in other people's work and what I managed to get from the interviews. Norms and sexuality. So as we all know, bisexuality disrupts monosexual norms, making it uncomfortable for society. And patriarchy contributes to bisexual erasure. Women are hypersexualized, men are invisible. And the aforementioned unicorn concept, bisexuality reduced to fantasies, especially in heterosexual spaces. What was really interesting to me during the research was that I have managed to, that's something that I figured out later on while I was doing the analysis of the interviews. Around 6 out of 9 people are neurodivergent, and only a small portion of them did declare themselves as polysexual or, no, not polysexual, just a second. I'm sorry, English is obviously my second language and sometimes it just freezes. Just a second. Yeah, never mind, we'll get back to that. Yeah, so as previously stated, biphobia exists in both heterosexual and queer spaces. Fetishization and more visibility and understanding are needed for inclusivity. But what really interests me in a broader sense is how to make it happen. I mean, there are quite often different BI+ online events on prides across Europe. Bisexuality is seemingly visible, but what is our end game? Like, what would we like to achieve, and what is the way to achieve it? And when we are looking at things through an intersectional lens, what does being bisexual actually mean? Going back to neurodivergent interviewees, people that I spoke to, you have queer ND people. Are we discussing their neurodivergence or their bisexuality? How is it combined in their everyday lived experiences? How do they navigate their own identities? What does bisexual mean outside of our own queer spaces? Is the end game just like broadening the picture? And yeah, it's quite complicated, but at the same time super interesting. Interesting as it seems to me sometimes that even the bisexual community does not know in which way we would like to go, like how much visibility is enough visibility, as the issues that come with visibility are just kind of unfolding, and you cannot stop that. So yeah, it's one more thing to think about. And I just wanted to thank to everyone who allowed me to weave their knowledge, time, experience, patience, love, thoughts, and energy into this research. And I would really like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marinella. So I will open the floor to questions that anyone might have for Marinella. One question that I had was with regards to a lot of the experiences that you uncovered, particularly the fetishization. Did any of your participants speak about how that may have impacted other aspects like of their lives? Like, for example, the impact of fetishization and the workplace, if they happen to be out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, people either work in CSOs who are open, and they are open, or they most often do not disclose their sexuality. But it's not particularly related to the fact that they're bisexual. It's just that they are not heterosexual. Thank you.
There is a question in the chat that I'll read out loud. So there was a part in the presentation that said men are invisible. Not sure if it was regarding fetishization or unicorn. Couldn't remember exactly, but was curious to understand what you meant.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it now. Just a second. Men are invisible. I'm trying to find it, but patriarchy contributes to bisexual erasure. Women hypersexualized, men invisible. In terms of when we are speaking about bisexuality in women, that's mostly like hot, and we can, like, the society can chew it out up until a certain level. And bisexual men are being even either mocked or invisible. But when you're looking on like a larger level, bisexual men are not so prevalent or visible in like pop culture. I mean, they are, and things are changing. But when you're speaking to someone that's like 45-ish years old, they are, he is a bisexual man, and he says like, I'm completely invisible. Nobody understands that I exist. That was the thing.
Great. Thank you so much, Marinella. Okay. If there are no other questions for Marinella, we're going to move on to our next presenter. Marisa Tangeman is a final year PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Cambridge, where she is researching the complex relationship between bisexual audiences and representations of bisexuality in popular culture. She holds a BA in sociology from Mills College in California and an MSc in media and communications from LSE. Welcome, Marisa, and over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I will try to share my screen now. I have some slides. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm just going to assume.
Yes,
so.
good.
Okay, great. All right, let's see. Okay. Okay. Oops. Sorry, just a minute. Okay, hopefully that works and everyone can see my slides.
It's all good.
Great, thank you. All right, so yeah, my name's Marissa. I'm just wrapping up my PhD right now. So my PhD research is broadly looking at the kind of, power relations between bisexual people, bisexual audiences, and mass media, popular culture representations of bisexuality. But today I'm going to be kind of speaking about an article I'm working on that is not really about media necessarily. It's more broadly about the concept of bisexual visibility. So I'm interested in kind of theorizing a more kind of critical and nuanced understanding of the kind of broad concept of bisexual visibility. So I'm interested in kind of what that means, how we can theorize it, how we can kind of conceptualize it more specifically, and how bisexual people specifically also attempt to enact visibility for themselves. So this really kind of builds on the previous session on visibility, if anyone was in that session. And so my research is based on 35 semi-structured interviews with bisexual people in the UK. So I'll be discussing some of those interview findings, as well as more kind of theoretical discussions. All right, so let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust this so I can actually see my notes. I'm so technologically challenged for someone who studies media. Oops. All right, I'm actually just gonna try to resize my windows here. Okay, thank you guys so much for your patience. Sorry about that. Okay, so as we've seen in these presentations from the previous session on visibility, if you were there, visibility is an extremely important issue for bisexual people. There's lots of research that highlights the ways that bisexual erasure broadly harms bisexual people. And then there's also some more research coming out that highlights kind of the ways that bisexual people attempt to be visible and their desire for visibility. Specifically, I referenced the study by Rahel. If you guys were in that session, you saw her speak about bisexual visibilities in Germany. Yeah, so I specifically want to call this concept of bisexual visibility itself into question, and I believe it requires kind of deeper critical engagement. So I aim to unpack what bisexual visibility is, how bisexual people attempt to achieve it, and I really want to emphasize the control that bisexual people have over their own visibility. So visibility is often described as the ability to be seen. However, I propose that we understand bisexual visibility to refer to the ability to be seen in the desired way. So I propose a perspective that positions visibility as a spectrum rather than as a binary of either being seen, not being seen, where visibility and being seen are often considered to be kind of good and positive. And then on the other side, invisibility and not being seen is often considered to be bad and harmful. So yeah, as bisexual researchers, we're all pretty well equipped already to be deconstructing these binaries. So in my research, I use the term successful and unsuccessful visibility in my argument to prioritize the person making the visibility attempt and their personal and specific goal and their success in achieving that goal. So through my interview data, I explore what successful and unsuccessful visibility means for bisexual people. So as Rahel pointed out in their study, there's little research on the kind of visibility experiences of bi+ people and their relationships with visibility. So following that research by Rahel, who we heard from in the previous session, my participants described attempting to enact visibility in similar ways. So they mostly described using verbal cues such as coming out, dressing in a particular style, and engaging in queer communities to be more visible. So for many participants, coming out as bisexual and that being understood constituted successful visibility. However, not all participants were able to come out. So for example, one participant, Mary, said that coming out to her family was not an option. So instead of coming out through direct verbal communication to everyone in her life, Mary found a different way to conceptualize successful visibility for herself. So she said, I view it less as coming out and more of like bringing people to come in. And if they're trusted, then it's like, I feel I can share this part of myself with you. So successful visibility doesn't necessarily mean being visible to everyone in a person's life. And many bisexual individuals are selective in and when and with whom they make their identity known. So successful visibility is therefore not about simply being seen as bisexual, but being seen in the desired way, where bisexual people feel in control of their own visibility. So along with the use of direct verbal communication, many participants reported using visual cues and style to make their identity visible. So one participant, Jason, described wearing face masks printed with the bisexual flag to enact visibility. So he said, what's interesting about the bi flag is it's actually very unknown. So in a sense, some people will know what these mean, most won't. So because the bisexual pride flag is more specific and less recognized than like the rainbow gay pride flag, he felt like he had more control over what he was visible as and who he was visible to. So I argue that while successful visibility can describe the ability to be visible, it also describes the ability to be invisible. So if we think about visibility in general as a spectrum, one end will have visibility, while the other will have invisibility. And on the spectrum, visibility, invisibility, and everything in between can be considered successful visibility if that's the goal of the bisexual person themselves. So that's important. So not all participants wanted to be seen in the same way, and for many of them, control over their visibility was enacted through attempts at invisibility. So some participants described purposefully passing as straight or as gay to avoid homophobic or biphobic harm. And yeah, many participants used kind of subtle methods through visual cues and style, which would be recognizable to some people, but not everyone. So my findings support Rahel's that subtle methods are often used to kind of test the waters and help like maintain safety. So most participants employed multiple methods at different times. So sometimes, employing invisibility, sometimes employing visibility, and often kind of fluctuated between visibility and invisibility. So like successful visibility, experiences of unsuccessful visibility can also kind of happen at all parts of this visibility spectrum. So visibility attempts are not always successful, and bisexual people may run into barriers that lead to either invisibility or unwanted exposure. So for example, direct verbal communication does not always result in successful visibility, and many participants described not being believed as bisexual after coming out. So additionally, as Rahel suggested in her research, engaging in queer communities doesn't necessarily lead to greater bisexual visibility for a person. So when the goal is to be seen as bisexual, being erased or misrecognized as either straight or gay is considered unsuccessful visibility. However, while unsuccessful visibility describes erasure and experiences of invisibility, it also describes experiences of heightened visibility and unwanted exposure. So many participants described being outed against their will and even being rejected from family and loved ones as a result of sort of unwanted exposure, not being seen in the way they wanted to be seen. So unsuccessful visibility could also broadly describe like stereotypical representations of bisexuality in culture, where bisexual people are not in control of the way that bisexuality broadly is represented in culture and society. So while increased visibility is one way, an effective way to challenge bisexual erasure, I argue that we need to consider the ways that unwanted exposure and heightened visibility can also harm bisexual people. So additionally, we need to acknowledge how our visibility experiences are impacted by our other intersecting identities. So the risks associated with increased visibility are much greater for bisexual people with like additional marginalized identities. So visibility, for example, is already very heavily connected to race. So my bisexual participants of color experience the most harm associated with being seen. So the intersectional experiences of bisexual people and the multitude of diverse visibility goals should be considered in further research on the kind of specific experiences of bisexual visibility. So as bisexuality complicates binaries, a binary understanding of visibility and invisibility is not sufficient in addressing the visibility needs of bisexual people. So while visibility is crucial for increasing political recognition and civil rights, and lots of stuff that we talked about in that first session on visibility, it also increases risks of harm. So through an exploration of the unequal risks associated with bisexual visibility, we can see how kind of uncritical calls for inclusion and visibility that don't consider intersectional experiences can put those most vulnerable to the harms of heightened visibility on the front lines. So I just want to end with a quote from Ruha Benjamin from her book, Race After Technology. So she asks, what does it mean to be included and hence more accurately identifiable in an unjust set of social relations? So bisexual people are marginalized and subordinated through our social relations, and we already experience high risks of stigmatization, stereotyping, discrimination, and violence. And so for many bisexual people, particularly those with additional marginalized identities, heightened visibility and inclusion can reproduce practices of discrimination and surveillance. So I want to refer back to Professor Palota Chiaroli's keynote talk and her discussion of exclusion by inclusion, which I think is really relevant here, kind of how calls for broad inclusion can ignore bisexual intersectionalities and wind up kind of reproducing exclusionary practices. So while I do believe that visibility is a really worthy goal in the abstract, I want to encourage bisexual researchers to kind of pay more close critical attention to calls for greater inclusion and visibility, considering who's controlling the visibility, who will benefit from that visibility, who might experience heightened risk of harm as a result of that invisibility or that visibility, and also think about who may be experiencing exclusion by inclusion. So that is everything. Sorry, I think I spoke so fast because I didn't know how much time I lost in my difficulties, but here's just some references and just some more further reading if you're interested in reading some more studies on bisexual visibility or anything that I referenced in my talk. And my email's there if anyone wants to send me any questions or concerns, comments, anything, or just say hi. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marisa. I really loved what you said about the successful visibility is being seen in the desired way. That really resonated with me, and I love the idea of the spectrum too. I'll read one comment from the chat, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. So just a reflection, sometimes I feel like gay and lesbian people hold a grudge towards bi people because bi people can more easily perhaps be invisible when they need or want to be, and they see this as a privilege that gay and lesbian people might not have. This is only based on personal experience, not a fact.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's, yeah, a pretty big issue. And there's some kind of recent scholarship I've read too about kind of this question of like, is passing a privilege? What is kind of passing, and deals with that issue. I mean, yeah, this talk, I'm talking a bit about like the risks of heightened exposure, but also there's so much on the harms of invisibility and erasure. And so passing while it can be helpful to like protect against harm, definitely, and a lot of bisexual people actually we do sometimes like purposefully pass to protect ourselves, and that's completely valid and understandable. This like unintentional passing and being misrecognized, and that's like erasure, is still super harmful, and it's frustrating that, yeah, sometimes that's not really understood.
Yeah, I remember one scholar, McLean, referred to it as blending. It's that unintentional passing. Bisexual people can just blend in, and it also depends on the space that they're occupying. So if you're in a queer space, you might blend one way versus being in kind of like a heterosexual space. And Ellen, thank you for popping in Rosie's article along Deconstructing the Myths of Straight Passing Privilege.
Yeah, that's the article I was thinking of.
Another comment in the chat that I'll just read. Really interesting, thank you. From your wider research and experience, does your conceptualization of successful or unsuccessful bi visibility, sorry, another message just came in, unsuccessful, successful bi visibility at the individual level described here differ or overlap from a wider societal understanding, or at least above the individual level, of successful or unsuccessful bi visibility?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's something that I am thinking about quite a bit, because my PhD research is really on this kind of broader relationship between popular culture and like dominant discourses surrounding bisexuality, and then like individual audiences. So this bit is kind of, this article is a bit separate from what I normally do. So I have been thinking, yeah, a lot about this kind of like, how can we think about the relationship we as individuals have with our visibility, with this kind of broader relationship of bisexual visibility. But I think, yeah, a lot of like the kind of core of both kind of broader and individual visibility is really about like control and power. And I think the kind of core questions that link these is like, who is in control of the visibility? So as individuals, we really want to be in control of like who we're visible to and when. And with kind of broader representations of bisexuality, again, it's really important to think about like who's controlling that. Is that bisexual people? Who is benefiting from that? And yeah, so within like, yeah, popular culture, media, within like research, academic research, who is controlling this visibility, broader or just kind of individual, is really important. So that's kind of how I conceptualize these together, if that makes sense.
Awesome, thank you. Robinox just made a comment in the chat saying, important, actively passing or misrepresenting oneself is not the same as being passed by. The fact that we are not recognized unless we actively speak up. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that really connects to this idea of control, who's controlling. And so I want to kind of differentiate the concept of like invisibility with erasure. And I don't see those as really the same thing. Erasure is this like intentional misrecognition and suppression, whereas invisibility is maybe a bit, could be a more neutral kind of term, and that could be like the goal of a bisexual person. They could be invisibilizing themselves, but erasure really describes that like suppression.
Great. Thank you so much, Marisa. Okay, our final speaker, Ada. Ada Marukan is an American, I'm going to screw this acronym up, so I'm just going to say it. SOGIESC researcher and queer feminist activist with 8 years of experience in nonprofits, specializing in grassroots advocacy for women in queer communities. She is a team member on the Armenian LGBTQ+ organization Queer Sister Platform and an executive board member at IGLYO. I know I'm probably totally messing up these acronyms. She holds an MA degree in gender studies from Central European University and a bachelor's degree in cultural studies from Yerevan State University. And her academic interests center on exploring the intersections of gender and sexuality with a specific focus on the experience and identities of LBG women. And today, Ada is presenting on the intersections of gender and sexuality among bi+ women in Armenia. Over to you, Ada.
Thank you so much. Just to clarify, I'm an Armenian, not an American, just
Oh, yeah,
to
sorry, I
be
think I
clear.
missed
Yeah, thank you. And let me share my screen. Mhm. Just one moment. Okay. Mhm. So, as already been presented, I will talk about my recent research, which is about the intersections of gender and sexuality among BIPOC women in Armenia. So basically, I am going to present a rather smaller article from a bigger research, which explores the narrative construction of the sense of self of queer women in general in contemporary Armenia. And the research seeks to uncover how gender and sexuality interact and mutually shape the experiences of LBQ individuals. I did a qualitative research making use of semi-structured in-depth interviews with 11 queer women and non-binary, agender, or queer identifying individuals for collecting their life stories. And I did these interviews during April 2024. I have interviewed 6 cisgender women, and 5 of the participants identified as non-binary, agender, or queer. Among them, there were self-identifying lesbians, bisexuals, pansexuals, queers, and one person was identified biromantic, and the age of the participants varied from 18 to 35. So as I said, today I will present an article from bigger research, today's presentation is mostly about the discriminations faced by BIPOC women in Armenia. So when referring to the sexuality of bi, pan, and queer women in this context, I mean those individuals who can be attracted to more than one gender, or for whom a person's gender is not significant when feeling attracted to them. So gender and sexuality are intrinsically intertwined, and it is hard to separate them. This means queer women are discriminated against for both their sexuality and their gender simultaneously. Although general manifestations of homophobia and misogyny can be quite similar among queer women, there are fundamental differences in the discrimination stories of, for example, lesbians and BIPOC identifying individuals. So the issues faced by BIPOC women have several main directions. And let me start with the most common and frequently encountered one. Will you please make your mind up? Like almost all bisexual participants of the research mentioned that at least once they have been asked what prevents them from making up their minds and finally choosing a side. People sometimes genuinely lack understanding of what it means to be bi or pan or queer and have sincere questions. But in most of the case, these questions seem more like accusatory statements than genuine inquiries. So BIPOC women often feel rejected or excluded by other members of general LGBT community, and they are mostly labeled as not queer enough, or they are accused of being traitors to the community. So so-called betrayal is generally defined by people as having a relationship with men or being interested in them. On the other hand, BIPOC women sometimes struggle with their sense of queerness themselves. So it is sometimes very challenging for them to continue accepting and considering themselves as queers because This is especially when they are in a relationship with men. So some of my participants mentioned that they start questioning if they are sufficient queer when they realize that being in a relationship with men is not widely accepted by LGBT community in general. And additionally, some of my participants mentioned that maintaining connections with the community and being in the community centers help them to feel more queer and being in peace with their queerness. Therefore, when they notice that they're not accepted within queer community spaces, they started to lose interest in being these spaces, and they don't feel safe going there, which results in a diminished sense of queerness. So another issue I would like to talk about is that bi+ women often face difficulties in romantic relationships. So from the beginning, these relationships are often burdened with the stereotype that bi women will inevitably leave their relationships with women to build relationship with men. Participants also note that this is not only manifests in their relationships, but also hinders them from starting relationships in general. People simply do not want to start relationships with those who are definitely going to leave them and go away. So interestingly, besides being accused of living during the relationship, bi women are often blamed from starting relationship with men even after the breakup. So this is also an issue in the community. At the same time, when discussing the complexities of relationships in like when discussing the complexities of relationships, almost all of my bi+ respondents mentioned that it is very difficult for them to build relationships with men, especially Armenian men. And like almost all of them has this understanding of what Armenian man means. And so this is a concept that is that is shared with all of my participants. So they often point out that men mostly have very heteronormative views about relationships. And when referring to heteronormative views, participants mainly mention the desire of men to dominate and the emphasis on traditional gender roles within relationships. So manifestations of toxic masculinity are also frequently encountered in relationships with men, which is something that my participants try to avoid in their relationships. Last but not least, I would like to talk about the sexualization. So as you might guess, bi+ women are also not spared from being sexualized. However, it has specifications. So they are more frequently encounter proposals for threesomes. They note that people often have the impression that bi women always want to have threesomes. Interestingly, they mostly receive these proposals from heterosexual couples or men who intend to include another woman in their sexual acts. One of my participants absolutely described this as a way to fulfill men's heterosexual desires. So it is important to mention that participants do not generally speak negatively about threesomes. The issue arises in two main cases. The first one is when people propose threesomes, they mostly assume that bi women must be willing and ready for it, which is of course not always the case. And secondly, it is problematic for all of my bi+ respondents that threesomes are exclusively aimed at fulfilling men's fantasies. So overall, trying to conclude my speech, I would like to highlight that, as you see, we cannot speak about sexuality completely ignoring gender, because at least at queer women's case, and in this case at bi+ women's case, gender and sexuality are always intertwined, and they make the reality of bi+ women. So this is all about the research, and before finalizing my speech, I just want to mention that I'm also part of the team of Bi+ Equal, which is a new project, and currently we are conducting a research to map the needs and experiences of bi+ organizations or activists across Europe. So if you want to be part of research, or if you want to join us at Bi+ Equal, you can screenshot this page. You can find all the contacts. That's it from my side, and here you can see my contact information in case this is something you are interested in and you want to discuss anything. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ada. And I see that information about Bi+ Equal has been popped into the chat as well. So that's great. Thank you.
Great.
Any questions for Ada? Okay. I found it really interesting that your participants were saying, or at least what came through for me was that, there was no negativity about the threesomes, but that it was all about fulfilling a heterosexual desire. That's like very interesting to me.
Yes, this was something that like all of my participants mentioned. And I mean, it isn't having specific kind of sexual act is a question of, we can say, taste or a desire, and it is not necessarily connected with sexuality. So the main issue is that like they are trying to hypersexualize bi+ women in general, and also that like all this sexual act aims at fulfilling man's desire, not even like there is no question about women, what women wants. Yeah.
Interesting. Another comment in the chat is, do you know how open your participants were about them being bi+ to their partners?
Yes. So most of them are very open about to mention about their sexuality to their partners, but yeah, and and they are also open talking about their sexuality in their smaller circle where they can feel safe. Yeah, but like all of them mentioned that their partner usually knows about their sexuality.
Okay, great. Yeah, it kind of sounds like, I know Marisa, one of your participants said something about, their visibility and how it was like calling people in. And Ada, it kind of sounds like that as well. Like, they're inviting people to their bisexuality. Okay, Robin has also popped another resource into the chat for Bi Women Quarterly. Thank you for that. And if there are no more questions for Ada, I will wrap our session up. So again, a big thank you to Marinella, Marisa, and Ada for these great presentations on Bi+ invisibility and identities.